Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas podcast from still the aforementioned Chase Thomas coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. Joining me from Rocky Top Insider, it's Ryan Schumpert. Ryan, good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. Glad to be back on here one day later. Glad you're recovered from some Memorial Day stomach issues and ready to talk a little Tennessee baseball and basketball.
Glad you're a longtime respecter of HIPAA. Ryan Schumpert. Also here, Caleb Jarreau of the Daily Times. And I just said it fast because I'm going to butcher it because we just talked about before we started that there's just no way because there's a Cajun way of Caleb pronouncing his last name that is not fair to me. I'm just going to go ahead and take a stand here on his first appearance on this very program that it's asking too much of a host to be able to enunciate one of his guests here. And it's hard, Caleb. I can't do it.
Words are hard, Chase, but I appreciate you. I appreciate you having me on. It was good enough, close enough. I'll take it. I will respect HIPAA, so I won't talk about anybody's, illnesses or spitting water out on the floor before we started this recording. But yeah,
I don't know who could have possibly done that. Someone that really just doesn't have a whole lot of self-control, I guess.
Oh my God. What a start. And Caleb is also at the Daily Times, so make sure you go subscribe and keep up with Caleb's work there each and every day. Ryan, as we get into today's, because we are a day behind of when we usually do the Tennessee Vols Sports Guys here, it actually worked out because we have a day to kind of get comfortable and think about Tennessee's regional path and then knowing who they'll have in the super regional, if Arkansas makes it out of their regional, which I was listening to somebody the other day who said that Arkansas last time they were this exact seed or something, they didn't get out of the regional, I want to say. And Vanderbilt, the last time they were the number one overall seed, they did not get out of their regional either. And I think ETSU has a 30-something% chance of getting out of Vanderbilt's bracket. So that's going to be great on the Vanderbilt side of things. But when you look at the regional, now that you've had some time to really think about this, do you feel like this is a good regional draw for UT ultimately with the Griffin Merritt Invitational, what we're calling it, friend of the program, Griffin Merritt, this weekend? Is it a good one?
I think overall, I would think it's a better one if Tennessee was going to throw Marcus Phillips on Friday night and save Liam Doyle for Saturday. But no, I think overall you can't be upset with the draw for Tennessee. Look, I think you just look at RPI 30 and 33 for Wake Forest and Cincinnati. So, in theory, a good 3 seed, but given Tennessee's the 14 overall seed, a pretty low from an RPI standpoint. 2 seed and Miami, Ohio, I think is a good 4 seed, maybe not the best 4 seed in the field or anything like that. Not a right state from 2021, but certainly is a good team. But you can't complain about that when you're the number 14 overall seed. So I think you have to be happy overall. This Tennessee, I tweeted it yesterday. I think it's probably in now 4 times that Tennessee's been a regional host under Tony Vitello. I think it's probably the easiest draw they've gotten. Now I think it's the worst of those 4 teams, so that doesn't mean that Tennessee is going to necessarily get out and take advantage of it. But I think overall, you can nitpick, you can complain about a few things here or there, but for being number 14 overall seed, I think you have to be pretty pleased with the draw you got if you're Tennessee.
Do you agree, Caleb?
Yeah. I to add on to Shumpert's point, I think the only thing that will make this regional more interesting is the fact that all of these teams have super weird. Not weird, but kind of like they all have their quirks. So like Cincinnati is going to run the bases really well. And I think that could give Tennessee trouble. But these teams, when you look at, like Schumpert said, a 14 seed, this is probably the best you could expect RPI wise. Your 4 seed is probably a true 4 seed. And your 2 and 3 are pretty close, but that's what you'd expect at this point. But I will piggyback off of Shumpert's point that the whole point of Tennessee wanting to host, or, the conversations about Tennessee wanting to host, is that you would get to play that 4 seed in game 1 and save Liam Doyle for a game 2 that could push you into Sunday. Because when you look at the bracket and the way these regionals are set up, there's no reason to not throw Marcus Phillips on that first game, in my opinion. But other than that, pitching wise, I think, pure draw standpoint, I think Tennessee has a favorable draw compared to some other teams. It's probably harder. Compared to some others, it's a little easier. So I think for a 14 seed, it's what you expect. And I'm curious to see how they handle some of the the quirky aspects or some of these under the radar pitchers that, have really good stats, but maybe haven't played SEC teams this year and see how they do this weekend.
Who do we think is the worst matchup for Tennessee in this bracket?
I think it's Cincinnati from the standpoint of Marcus Phillips is going to throw. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a guy that's had, and he's been better at it his last two starts, but against an Arkansas and Alabama teams that don't really steal a lot of bases. So you wonder how much you can take into that. And it's a Cincinnati team that steals bases at a higher clip than anyone Tennessee's played all season. So I think from that when you just match up who Tennessee would be facing up with who would be pitching, like, I think it's got to be that. I think Wake Forest is the best team. And I think there's an aspect for like Wake Forest offense, I think, is better than any other team in this region. Like, anything you could say about them, their pitching, their bullpen, their starters. Like, I think Wake Forest offense is the best of that. So I think Tennessee is going to have to outscore Wake Forest so they get them on Saturday. But then you also kind of look around and you see, seems like the likelihood is Wake Forest game two guys, Matthew Dallas, former Vol, whose numbers are pretty just putrid this year against anybody with a pulse. And doesn't mean he couldn't have a good outing against Tennessee. Couldn't mean that Tennessee couldn't lose a shootout. But you do feel like with that matchup, even if you do get a Marcus Phillips start that's 4 2/3, 3 runs given up, then you're going to have to lean on the bullpen and maybe have to win a little bit higher scoring game. You just kind of look at the pitching matchup and you feel like, all right, Tennessee at least should have a good chance to score a lot of runs and potentially win a high scoring game against the Demon Deacons.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those. It's kind of funny. We were so nervous about, like we were talking the last couple of weeks, of just would it be better for this team because of how they've played at home over the last month or so. It's like it's just better for them to be on the road in the regional. And then you go to Hoover and you have the game of the tournament, even though you don't end up winning it. The Texas game was a big time win, a gut check win, and it just goes to show like just how crazy the ups and downs are for this Tennessee team. Like the worst of the worst against Vanderbilt. To get eliminated, but also the best of the best where they really can beat anybody and are capable of hanging with anybody, like a Texas, like an LSU, where they could have easily won 2 or 3. They could have won 2 or 3 against Arkansas. Like if you win here, you probably have to go to Fayetteville, but we'll see if Arkansas gets out. You might host both. Like you might have it. There might be a situation where Tennessee still goes from being on the road for the regionals and the super regionals, we thought 2 weeks ago, to they might be hosting both. And that just kind of speaks to how insane this season and the roller coaster ride it's ultimately been for Tennessee in 2025. It's also kind of a bummer that we're getting Wake Forest here the year after the Chase Burns departure, because I don't know if y'all agree, but I look at Miami, and no offense to Miami, Cincinnati, and Wake. I don't know what their travel party is going to look like here. Relatively close, ultimately, but it just doesn't feel like. Now, granted, I should say, I didn't think Evansville would have a lot of juice when they came to Knoxville, and Evansville had some strong juice when they came, and they were rowdy. And I think, Ryan, we talked about it last year. I was walking through Market Square like the morning of the Sunday game, and it's like they're just taunting Tennessee fans, like Evansville, like out and about, like taunting Tennessee fans.
Baby.
Yeah, like they were all about it. Maybe we'll get the same kind of juice from Miami fans here this weekend or something, but I don't know. I look at this regional bracket, I'm like, there's just not a lot of I just feel like Tennessee's going to roll. And maybe that's foolish to me, Caleb, but I look at this and I'm like, it's not like you got one great matchup. It's not like Clemson where you have West Virginia in that bracket along with Kentucky. I mean, Kansas could give Arkansas real problems there, huh?
I completely agree with Kansas, but the Clemson one, is that really any different than Tennessee?
Yeah, I mean, West Virginia wasn't on track to host for till the last.
West Virginia was on the bubble, and Schumpert knows how I feel about this. Tennessee did dodge having, the ACC regular season champion Georgia Tech, which got stiffed out of a host because 2 Sun Belt teams are hosting. That's a conversation for a different day. But no, Chase, I'm torn for the simple fact, and Schumpert hit on it. If you face a juiced up Matthew Dallas, then all of a sudden things look a little different on that Saturday, because you're facing, this Wake Forest team is not the Wake Forest teams that had Rhett Lauder and Chase Burns. Yeah. Not even close. But if all of a sudden you get a guy at his best and their lineup kind of can hang and compete against, once again, if you're not throwing Liam Doyle, then things could get a little dicey. And I don't trust Tennessee with their pitching depth to make it through a loser's bracket in this regional. And on the flip side, if you face Cincinnati with Marcus Phillips on the mound and he gives up a leadoff walk, all of a sudden that guy's on third in 2 pitches and a ground ball can score him. So I think if you run into something like that, that's when things can get a little dicey. But on paper, if everything holds chalk, Tennessee should go through this regional. But that's the only thing about this regional. You have teams that play a little weird. Like that Cincinnati play style, the way they're going to try to scrap runs across reminds me a lot of Vanderbilt. And we saw what Vanderbilt was able to do in Lindsey Nelson Stadium. And I think the way they play as well, it's not the long ball, but it could get, if they have fans there, it could get a dugout juice pretty quick if you're just taking free 90s all night. So that's the only thing I worry about in this regional is play styles. And that's kind of what you see in postseason for any sport is no matter how good or bad a team is, they made it this far. And, if they have a really good day and just have a bad matchup for you, that it can hurt you. But that's why I just don't understand. And I know Schumpert said it too. I don't understand rolling the dice and not throwing Liam Doyle on Saturday because you end up in the same spot either way. But if you get Liam Doyle on Saturday, you have your best guy on the mound in your toughest game of the weekend to send you to championship Sunday. So I think matchups will be the key this weekend.
Yeah, no, and Caleb, we talked about this earlier, but it's just like, there is generally a little bit of difference of losing your first game and your second game. But I think for this Tennessee team with the pitching depth questions, like, I don't feel very good about Tennessee making it out if they lose on Saturday either. So to me, Tony Vitello talked about it today on Tuesday. It's one game at a time. You're just focused on what's ahead of you. I think you should look at it as a 2-game thing. It's about winning. It's a double elimination tournament, but it's about winning the single elimination. And I think you should stagger your pitching to be the best against that. And not that Liam Doyle would be indestructible against Wake Forest, but I think you would certainly feel better. And the thing that I think, again, to the Wake Forest point, we've seen the ball travel very, very well at Lindsey Nelson Stadium in June. Wake Forest is an offense with 6 different dudes that have double-digit home runs. Granted, they play in a small ballpark too in Winston-Salem, but it is an offense with a lot of guys that can hit home runs and an offense that walks, I think, like the 4th most in the country. So that offense is really good. Like I hit on it earlier, but you're in a lot of ways, it feels like with anybody for Tennessee pitching other than Liam Doyle, you kind of feel like you're going to have to outscore them in a lot of ways. And it could end up that way for Liam Doyle too. But I think you'd feel more confident. At least I would feel more confident if you throw your best punch against them. And then to quote the wise Sam Smith of Twitter, I mean, he said it in a reply to me, I think yesterday, and I think it was completely accurate. If you can't beat Miami of Ohio with Marcus Phillips, who's projected to be a top 3-round pick, you don't deserve to make it out of your own regional. Like I think it's not like Marcus Phillips is some dude with an 8.5 ERA who hasn't been good this year. He's been good for Tennessee. It's not like he's not a trustworthy guy to throw to start a regional. So that's kind of my full takeaway on it. And I'm going to try not to harp on it too much this weekend because it just is what it is. But I really don't see. I do see the logic of not mixing it up and going with Doyle on Friday. I just think the pros of making that change just way outweigh the cons.
And once again, when you look at the regional layout, if you lose, like let's say you throw off Friday, in the worst case scenario you lose, you have to win a game on Saturday, and you still have to win 2 on Sunday, 1 on Monday. Yeah. If you throw Liam Doyle Friday night and then lose Saturday, you still have to win 2 on Sunday, and you still have to win 1 on Monday. So you're positioning yourself to have the best chance to enter Sunday 2-0. And I mean, you look last year, the year before. It was the year before LSU threw Paul Skeens on their Friday game against the 4 seed, and it turned out okay. Yep. So
we're not the only team that's done this. Like we shouldn't make it sound like that. Like it's relatively
just,
popular.
When you look at the numbers, it just I don't know if Cincinnati wasn't in the regional. Are we talking about it as much? Probably not. But you know how Marcus Phillips is when there's base runners, and Cincinnati is a team that wants to get on base and take a lot of extra bases. Or if Wake Forest wins and you get those 0-2 fastballs down the middle, then it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add on to that too, the one maybe counterpoint, maybe if you use Liam Doyle on Friday, you lose on Saturday, you can come back and maybe use Doyle for a little bit on a Monday game. I don't know if I feel confident Liam would be cool doing that because he's such a competitor. I don't know if the people around him and how much money he has to make in a couple months would approve of that decision. And obviously then you turn around and kind of put him in a shaky spot of how do you use him in a super, even if you do make it out. But that's really the only other extra benefit I could see to winning a regional of throwing Liam in game one, besides just the standard, keeping the routines and everything like that the same as they've been all season.
Yeah. Last thing on the baseball front for regionals, and now knowing where Tennessee might have to go if Arkansas takes care of business in Fayetteville. I mean, based on what you saw from Arkansas, Tennessee, the first go around in Fayetteville, Caleb, do you see there being realistic possibility that Tennessee could win 2 or 3, or do you still just think going into Fayetteville, that's still asking a lot, and you didn't like the matchup the first time, and you could see 2 or 3 for Tennessee going down once again?
I think Tennessee in any series, I mean, I'd say it all year, and we saw how that turned out, but I think in any series they can win it, just with the pure talent on this roster. You just have to have guys step up and play how they can. So you need like an SEC tournament, Brandon Arvidsson, when you go to Fayetteville, and not regular season, Brandon Arvidsson. And I also wonder, and I'm not as tapped into Arkansas baseball, but if there's a mental hurdle for them as well, just knowing that team's history. I think they've lost in the regionals the last 2 years now. Could have that stat wrong. They've lost in the regionals a lot, and they've had consistent, good, very good baseball teams that haven't made it to Omaha. So I wonder on their side if there's a mental hurdle. But I also think with Tennessee, if Tennessee plays good baseball, they should win that series, and they can take a series from anybody in the country. It's just a matter of piecing that together and getting a good outing. You know what you're getting from Liam Doyle most weekends. You have to get a good outing from Marcus Phillips in your game 2, and then you got to hope your game 3 guys. You hope Tegan Kuhns throws the breaking ball with conviction, and you hope you get some more relief appearances like Brandon Arvidsson had, and a really good Nate Snead. But, if Tennessee makes it there, I think there is a chance they make it to Omaha. And I don't know if I pick them in the series, but I think there's definitely a chance they could take the series with some standout performances. Now, they could also get swept, and we see, Tennessee that we saw in the regular season. And I think that it goes both ways with this team, and maybe the postseason. I think this weekend will tell us a lot, and the SEC tournament told us a lot too. But I think maybe postseason kind of juices these guys up a little bit, and you realize like we lose, the season's over. Maybe we shouldn't let 9 stolen bases up this weekend.
Yeah. I mean, do you agree, Ryan? Because I look at it as like, I think if Tennessee gets out of the regional and even think at Arkansas, I think they win both. I think they go back to the College World Series. I think if they can make it through this weekend, I have a hard time believing they don't end up just getting back to Omaha altogether.
No, I would side more with Caleb. I think Tennessee's certainly capable of winning, but I would pick Arkansas. Like, that Arkansas offense is really good. I think that's what makes them different. Yeah, I think that's what makes them different than the last couple Arkansas teams that just kind of lacked a lot of juice offensively. But no, I mean, certainly Tennessee's capable of it. Like, Evansville took Tennessee to game 3 last year, and Tennessee was arguably the best SEC team of all time. Friend of the program, Jack Foster, was like willing to bet his limbs that Tennessee would sweep Evansville last year, and they dropped the game. So it's baseball after all.
Are you still saying like last year's Tennessee team was better all time than 22?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a lot of it has to do with what you did in the postseason matters a whole lot, but
I don't know. I just think it's just such a weird. I can't go there. I still just like the way Tennessee in 22 still just drubbed people was just it was something that
drubbed people the first half of SEC play. Crack started to form the second half. That was a more talented team, undoubtedly.
What do you think Vitello would say?
I don't know. Maybe 22 because they were more well-rounded. Again, I mean, they're more talent. The talent on the pitching staff in 22 was way better, but I think that goes both ways too, where you had a bunch of young arms in 22 who hadn't pitched a ton in high school because of COVID. Drew Beam had, I wanted to say, broken collarbone or Tommy John, something like that his senior year, and you saw those arms give out late in the season. So I think Tennessee, and look, this is such an easy thing to say because 24 won the national championship and 22 didn't. I think by the time you got to the postseason, the 24 team was better. They had found their stride. Where the 22 team peaked early in SEC play. I think the 24 offense was, to me, definitely better than the 22 offense, which is a 22 offense.
I don't know the final two. It was Cortland, and who was also in the bottom 2 of the 22 lineup?
Jared Dickey, Seth Stevenson.
Seth was leading off.
Yeah, but I mean, he was leading off, but yeah, I would say he was.
Here's how I would put it.
Better.
If I can enter this apparently long-standing argument, I would say if we're playing, if I'm a MLB front office, guy, I'm taking a player off the 22 team. But if I want to win a college baseball national championship, I'm taking last year's team because you had consistency. I feel like the 22 team, what cost them was they were too boom or bust because everybody wanted to hit home runs. So even like I remember there were 0-2, 1-2 counts, and they're swinging for the fences when you're down against Notre Dame with your season on the line. What I appreciate about last year's team is you had guys like Christian Moore who were also leaders, but also knew they don't need a home run every at bat. So you'd see him with a level swing. You also had guys like Cal Stark who couldn't hit a home run every at bat, but gave you everything he could in that 9-hole to turn the lineup over. And the pitching was just, they threw strikes. So I don't know.
Well,
I
the
think
pitching
last
was
year's team
scary
a lot
for a
better
while.
College
Like,
baseball team.
There's some revisionist
Because they're
history on
consistent.
Tennessee's pitching last year, where it was pretty scary going into May, and there was
Xander changed everything.
yes,
I mean,
Xander 100% changed
By the
everything.
time you got to Omaha, you felt really good. You felt good about the pitching because you felt really good about Xander.
Yeah.
And once again, he's a guy who's doing well in the minor leagues right now. But if I told you at the beginning of the year last year that he would end up what he was, you wouldn't believe me because he was a soft throwing lefty, but he could hit a baseball off a tee from 100 feet away. And that's what you needed.
He was a Buford Georgia guy, and Georgia guys are different. So you always bet on the Georgia guys. And that was just one of those where there was never a doubt in my mind the Buford Flowery Branch area that Xander was going to figure it out. If it took him 4 years, I knew the Sunday ace was there.
He was a state champion too, I think.
It wouldn't surprise me. And that means more in that classification when you're able to be a state champ in the state of Georgia than other spots. But you're about to say something, Ryan?
Yeah, just starting reliving my Xander love affair. Like he was just like the perfect guy for it too. He was just so unfazed by the moment, and being the game 3 guy, he pitched in like every big moment.
Yes.
Starting with the game that they clinched the SEC regular season title in the regular season against South Carolina. And I mean, behind the scenes story is Caleb was there that night, Saturday, after Tennessee lost to Evansville. I think it was the friends of the program, Ryan Sylvia, Jack Foster, Caleb, and myself went to get a great meal at Texas Roadhouse. And obviously everybody was very nervous and panicked. I should say in the fan base, not really us, but obviously a big point of conversation was Tennessee going to be able to respond the next day. And we see a young Xander Seacrest at Texas Roadhouse. And you just knew in that moment. You knew when the guy was eating a sirloin steak and a baked potato and those cinnamon rolls. You knew he was built for the moment. You knew he was ready. You can't be tight when you got Texas Roadhouse in the belly.
I'm sorry. Are cinnamon rolls on the menu at Texas Roadhouse?
They're rolls with the cinnamon butter.
Cinnamon butter.
Oh, is it cinnamon butter?
Yeah. It's unbelievable, Chase. It's the best culinary experience maybe in the entire world.
They don't have Texas Roadhouse in Georgia?
I just haven't been. I went to this is going to date me. Logan's is, I don't think, in existence anymore, but I used to go to Logan's when I was a kid.
They're similar.
If I've been to
There's
Texas
a Logan's
Roadhouse
still around.
It might be. I mean, I can count on one hand if I've been, but it's been a long, long time. I don't know.
Phenomenal establishment. I've long called it capitalism's greatest feat, the Texas Roadhouse. I mean, it's fantastic.
Do you know what Xander was? That actually Xander's order? Did you?
I have no idea. He was leaving as we were walking in, so I have no idea what he actually had.
Yeah, which makes it even funnier because he went there directly, knew he had the season on the line the next day, and was at Texas Roadhouse within probably 2 hours of the final out.
That's fantastic,
if not less.
Let's get Texas Roadhouse.
This is on the ground reporting that a lot of people don't understand that Ryan, Caleb, and the good folks do. All that kind of stuff. It's like you can't write a story on that. That's just something you have to put in a time capsule for a Chase Thomas podcast soundbite. About a year.
A little under a year later.
Yeah.
Time
flies when you're having fun.
It's just different, That's it's just again. I'm doing a bit. I'm joking about it, but I'm also being dead serious in that I felt so much more confident about the game the next day when I saw Xander at Texas Roadhouse. That's a guy just not nervous. That's a guy.
He was not nervous at all.
The night before the biggest start of his life.
I mean, his hat couldn't stay on, and he didn't care. Like he was unfazed by the little. I remember it was driving family members crazy. Like Xander couldn't keep the hat, and it's like that's part of the deal, man. Like I'm okay with whatever's going on. It doesn't matter. Like let Xander do whatever Xander wants to do because he's unbelievable.
When you throw as hard as he does, it's hard to keep the hat on.
That's true.
It's a good point. It's a really good point.
Below Seacrest is what many call him.
That's what they call him.
Ryan, Bart Torvik has Tennessee at number 11, number 2 in the SEC. I don't know with Florida getting Condon back where that puts them, if that puts them also ahead of Tennessee now. But, I mean, let's say, let me pull that up just to double check here in terms of whether or not they did. But when you look at that, does that feel about right to you based on where Tennessee's roster is at the moment? Yeah, Florida made it 5, so they're number 2. They're number 3 now in the SEC.
Then that's exactly right. I was going to say 11 feels about right where I'd have them nationally. I would have them 3. I think Florida is the best team in the SEC again, with Alex Condon back and Boogie Fland in the fold. And I would probably have Kentucky ahead of Tennessee too. Just a lot of talent on that roster, though. We'll see how all that meshes. A lot of new faces.
Hasn't announced yet, right?
He has not announced, but I think the assumption or the thought is that he's going to be back. I mean, it'll be official by the time, one way or another, by the time who y'all are listening to this. But yeah, I think 3 is where I would have them in the SEC. Fringe top 10 team sounds about right. There's a lot to like about the team. There's a lot of talent. There's enough question marks in one hold that I think you would say not a definitive top 10 team, but certainly not a team it would be surprising to see them spend a lot of year back in the top 10. And I think the SEC will still be good, but I don't think it's going to be like it was last year. I just look on paper. I think Alabama's rosters, I think Alabama will be the worst they've been since the 21-22 team that lost in the first round of Notre Dame. Auburn, we'll see what Pettiford does. I'm a little higher on them than Alabama, but don't love their roster either. Obviously a lot of new stuff at Texas A&M. A lot of turnover at other places. I don't know if I'm missing anyone just jarring. It should be a really good team in the league. So, I like 3, and I like as a fringe top 10 team. But to me, that all feels about right. Yeah,
Caleb, I look at it, and it's gonna. I'm kind of writing about this right now. I'm still. It's something that I'm still mixed about it because I don't. Ryan knows where I'm going with this, but I think I just kind of wonder, we won't have an answer here for many months in terms of whether or not Tennessee will be proven correct by this or not. But I do think Tennessee not doing an overpay potentially for Rodney Rice is one of those that, like, I wonder if they look back on where they're like, we should have, like, yes, he's not that kind of player, but if we're going all in, if Nate Ament is only a 1-year guy anyway, like, let's just put all of our chips in. Like, Jacoby Gillespie might be a 1-year guy. Like, you're going to be a lot younger next year anyway, with Amari Evans, with Clarence Masamba, with Troy Henderson, with potentially Dwayne Brown, maybe Cade Phillips. Like, there's just a lot of turnover where I just feel like it's going to be younger next year, and more inexperienced and more unproven guys that I think just the kind of glaring hole at 2 with Amari Abram, Clarence Masamba, and potentially Bishop Boswell, that you're like, you're so close because those 4 are going to be so dang good together that you're like, man, if you would have just bite the bullet and just have a little bit too much of an expensive roster this particular year, I would have gone over the cap. Like, how there's the aprons in the NBA, like there's a tax team, and you don't, like, certain teams are never going to approach the tax. Certain teams, like, this was a tax year to me. This was a second apron type year. Once you landed Nate Ament, and once you kind of go in to the extent that you have, like, I just think I would have gone over and then been like, hey, next year we're going to go back under and get it a little bit more under control. But this year I kind of need to go over a little bit. I don't know. Do you think that's fair?
I get where you're coming from. I wonder, and Schumpert might be better at this than me, but I wonder, could you afford Rodney Rice and Nate Ament? And if you could or couldn't, I think they made the right decision to get the highest rated recruit in Tennessee basketball history with Nate Ament.
Yeah.
Just because, yes, you're right, you need a 2 guard, but you also need playmakers. And I think this team can score better than last year's team, even if there is a hole at shooting guard. And I think what's good about these rankings too is Tennessee has a solid floor coming into the year where you theorize what the worst they can be. I mean, they're going to have a really good post room, if not the best in the SEC, I would think, just with how many guys they return and how much depth they'll be able to roll through there. But you're right. I think you do miss a guy at shooting guard. And I wonder, again, if they couldn't afford both Rodney Rice or Nate Ament, or if they're looking for something else in the portal to get instead, is my only guess. But I think, the whole overpay, underpay, we won't know until
Yeah.
this whole settlement comes through and everything. But I like where this roster is, and I think, truthfully, if you did have to pick between Rice and Ament, you got the right guy. Because I like the young guy at a high school who the staff also appreciated, who they were also able, it's a big recruiting win because you kind of gave up on landing him, but had a connection good enough that you're able to go back and say, hey, this is what our roster looks like. This is what our number is. Would you want to come here? And then he visited and ended up committing. So I think that's a big recruiting win. And I think it's something that we saw what Rick Barnes did with Kevin Durant. And I don't want to put, unjust expectations for another high rated 5-star guy, because we have seen other 5-star guys like Josiah Jordan-James who end up being on the team for 5 or 6 years and don't pan out to be one and dones like expected just for whatever reason. So I do either way. I like this roster. I think the floor is good. I agree with Schumpert that this ranking is probably about right, just because what your floor will be, and the ceiling is so high that this team, can make a deep run in March, or if, the portal things in the portal age, if stuff just doesn't click, then, maybe this team doesn't achieve. But I do like Nate Ament. I think you still wish you had a good shooting guard. But other than that, I really don't see a hole in this roster.
Yeah, I think. Look, I would agree with you, Chase. But I think that's a really easy thing to say when it's not your money.
100%.
Not my money.
It is.
Spending.
I'm just saying, I wish I had been on the phone. I wish I would have been included with Rick and just been like, Rick, let's talk this out. Like, I need you to push. I need you to push.
This is where I would push back on your take on it, because I do generally agree with you. You're making it sound like it's a restart, scratch over in 27, right? Yeah, in 2 years.
I mean, I think they're going to be a step back. I don't think there's a way around it.
You would have said the exact same thing at this time last year. They had a whole lot less guys coming back. You're going to have... I mean,
Akpara's gone, right? Like
you have 3 of your 4 front court guys back, and you have your young backcourt back, and that's including if Jacoby
Who's the young backcourt in this sentence?
Bishop Boswell, Amari Evans, Clarence Masamba.
But we don't know how much those guys are going to play this year.
Sure, of course we don't. I mean, obviously. You want to know what we knew Tennessee had coming back at this time last year?
Yeah.
Felix Okpara and JP Estrella and Cade Phillips and Bishop
That's
Boswell.
True.
It's all those guys just a year older. And
I look at it, I'm like, but that final one, he played with Jacoby Gillespie. He's the final, that's not even one you have to wonder about, that backcourt fitting together. Like, they were really good together. It's just one of those where I'm like, man, he was at the orange and white game. They did rolled out the whole red carpet.
What a time, the orange and white game. You don't see many kids come to the orange and white game and say, I don't want to be a part of this.
I don't know. People were pretty fired up. Like, people, it was a different kind of deal, obviously. Different kind of vibe this year. But I just look at it, I'm like, it just would have been the best. I mean, that would have been the best starting 5 in the Rick Barnes era, right? Like, no question.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, I think so. Most talented for sure.
I just would have. I understand it's not my money, and we don't know the official costs and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just like, they're so close to have, and it might not matter. Like, if Amari Abram is pretty good and Clarence Masamba is pretty good, and Bishop Boswell takes a step, then it might not matter. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm again, in the end, I'm with you. Which again, it's just easy to say from our perspective that they should have spent the money that I do think they could have done. My just big but was like the way you phrase it to me kind of makes it sound like this is a 1-year deal. Like you're not going to be in this position a year from now.
Well, Rick doesn't know what his feeling's going to be next year because Rick's in a year-to-year type thing. Like, because isn't the whole thing with Rick is like once he goes to realize he doesn't want to go to practice anymore or something, then that's it. Because that was like Dean Smith's thing is like once you don't want to it's going to be done. When it's done, it's going to be done in a hurry, right? Like it's not going to be some drawn out Coach K type deal, a retirement tour.
Yeah.
Like we're not going to do that. So you kind of are on a year-to-year deal if you're Rick.
Yeah, certainly to a degree, but that's just never ending. You just have to go all in and overspend every year because of that. Like
yes, overspend every year. It's that easy, Ryan Schumpert. It's just that easy.
It's just as easy as buying a roster. Just ask Kansas State and Baylor and all those teams last year that spent a lot of money and had terrible results.
Kansas State's back. They just got
they did.
What's
Haggerty?
Haggerty, yeah.
Or Memphis, that's another good one. Just go buy the roster. It's that simple.
I think it's also worth mentioning, like, Rodney Rice was good, but he had one one good season of production. He was injured before that. I mean, they didn't miss out. I know he would have had, instant chemistry with Gillespie, but they didn't miss out on like Michael Jordan in the portal here. Like I think
Yeah.
it's still a very good team. And I don't really know how much Rice would really move that line personally. I'm sure there's other names in the portal you could pick that they missed out on because of numbers, like the kid from Virginia. I can't remember his name, Schumpert. I'm sure you would know it.
McNeely.
McNeely. Yeah.
Yeah, the one who could really shoot the three. Like we're talking about Rice because he's friends with Gillespie, but what about, that guy? How far off are they on numbers for him or anything like that? So
I thought that was a
think
school thing. Was that
I
just
mean,
the
that's
rumor? We just don't
something
know.
that's something that was out there. I don't, how I didn't talk to Isaac McNeely about what the final say in his decision was. I do
these
think
guys
there
still
is.
go to school.
He went to Virginia. He's a good student.
Yeah,
I think part of this, to your point, Caleb, it was a bad shooting guard class. Like Tennessee needed a shooting guard, and it was a bad shooting guard class in the portal. So
I feel
you
like
end up having to these players that are pretty good and are getting $3 million, and you're like, just match the offer. I think there's an element of Rick Barnes, like, I don't think Rick Barnes thinks any of these kids are necessarily worth $3 million, but he's like, I'm sure as heck not paying this kid who's not even.
But that's
close
part
to
of
worth
free
$3 million.
agency. Like in the house, I know not coming down. Like that's part of free agency. Like some teams have to overpay. Like Christian Kirk got overpaid by the Jags, but he was still a good player for them. Like he wasn't worth the money. Like some of it is like you do have to overpay sometimes to get like with the understanding that they're not going to reach what the number matches.
They did for Nate Ahmed,
I don't know. Nate Ahmed, I like Nate Ahmed is just.
Let's not start this narrative that Rick Barnes is afraid to pay kids.
No. I'm not saying that. I am not. And let me be perfectly clear. That's not. Rick Barnes has done a great job, and he's done a great job this offseason. I am just saying it's like it's how I started this whole conversation. Is like it feels like nitpicking a little bit, but it's also like you're so close, and you see where Florida's at, you see where Arkansas is at. And then you look at the rest of the top.
Arkansas would be the other SEC team that is in Tennessee's range that I forgot about.
Yeah. And I'm just like, I think if you had just overpaid, and Kaylee makes a good point about like, we only have really one great year of production for Rice, and injury stuff is also a concern. Like, what if he's banged up and you don't even have, like, he's not even available? Like, that could be something. But I don't know. It's easier to say on the outside that like I would have just overpaid for Rodney Rice, and I would have just stacked my starting five with the best starting five in the SEC, and then seen what happens this year.
Yeah, no, I mean, in the end, I agree with you. With the caveat of it's obviously a nuanced conversation, but I was also really high on Rodney Rice. I like his game a lot. I think he would have fit well in the roster with his ability to hit 3-pointers at a pretty high clip off of a lot of pin downs, and also kind of get to the mid range. I think he has a game somewhat similar to what you saw Jordan Gainey evolve into last year.
Yeah.
And certainly when fifth year conversations and stuff like that, I think everybody knows how valuable Jordan Gainey, would have been to this roster if he did have another.
Well, that's the other thing too. It's like, well, Sakai just might be back, and then it's all who cares? Like we're all fine. Who cares?
Yeah.
Who knows? You never know.
CBS did say Rodney Rice got $3 million, which, if he was getting paid $3 million, then you also have to bring up, the whole free agency argument. Hey, we got Rodney Rice for $3 million, but we've got, guys who were already here who aren't getting paid $3 million. And then you might run into, I don't know if this team will, but you always worry about, the money conversations and guys, maybe not them, but their families or agents getting mad when it comes out that, like Chase is saying, you overpay for a roster. And all of a sudden, you've got the guys who didn't enter the transfer portal that are like, wait, why didn't, I get that money? So I think you run into a host of issues when you do fold on some of the standards that Rick Barnes holds of like, here's our number. If you don't want our number, then just don't come here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's especially true with like Rodney Rice. I think from a financial standpoint, that was like a very public recruitment in the sense of I think everybody knew that it was about money. Or not solely about money, but money was a very big factor. He milked out a lot of visits to try to get bigger offers. That $3 million number was out there immediately after he committed to USC. Like sometimes these kids get a bunch of money, but it's the numbers and stuff like that aren't as public. So I think it's easier to manage from a roster continuity standpoint. And I don't necessarily think Rodney Rice's recruitment was one of those.
Yeah, because it was like it's been reported. Like you just go to the Maryland site right now. It's like reportedly the deal is reportedly for $3 million. Like it's just out. Like you don't see that. Just
I Googled
reportedly.
Rodney Rice's name to see what his one season points average was. I could remember it. It was like the first thing that pops up.
Yeah, and that's not the case for most of these transfer portal signings and everything else. Caleb, just how special of a season is Andrew Fischer having for the Vols? How would you put it into the best context for fans who've watched Andrew Fischer all year and just what he's actually done this year for the Vols?
Yeah, I think the best way to sum up Andrew Fisher's season, it's been a season he looks like a professional baseball player at this point compared to last year, especially when you look at his strikeout numbers. Last year he struck out around a 20% clip, which if you're in the MLB batting 300 and cranking home runs, then people can deal with that. But if you're a college baseball player, you probably should not be striking out that much if you want to be considered top tier. This year he's down to I think 14% strikeout rate. I mean, his numbers are insane. He leads the SEC in on base percentage plus slugging, home runs, walks. He's got the best average for UT, in conference and out of conference for guys who are eligible. So I think when you look at those numbers, or his best average in conference, when you look at those numbers, like, sure, it might not be the flashiest season. Like, yeah, he still leads in home runs, but in conference, those home runs haven't been as much. He's been kind of a midweek merchant with the home runs, but he's been on base every game this season. He's played every game this season. Availability is one of the best skills you can have. So I think just to kind of put it into context, a lot of the stuff he's done might fly under the radar just because of how good he's been. And you got two sides of the coin for a guy like Andrew Fischer, who had a really good year last year. You can look at it like he came into this year, everybody knew what he was capable of coming off of last year. So they know how to pitch to him. He's got a scouting report out on him, and he still was able to put up these numbers. And then there's also, maybe teams are pitching around him. But when you look at Tennessee's lineup, you can't really pitch around Andrew Fischer because you run into 2 or 3 great bats right behind him. So it's been a lot of adjustment for him, I would say. And I think when he came to Tennessee, he kind of accepted the fact that, yes, Tennessee's known for producing power hitters, but if he wants to go to the league, he'd cut his strikeouts down and show that he was a lot more than just a guy who could hit home runs. And I think when you look at that strikeout percentage of around 14%, and then also, on base percentage plus slugging, which is what professional, front office guys just foam at the mouth about, then, he's turned himself into a great, even better MLB prospect and one of the best hitters on this team. And I think now that he's kind of getting into the postseason, maybe the long ball especially will be helpful. But I mean, if you've got a guy who's getting on base as much as he is, and with the walks, and he's getting on I think his on base percentage is 500, so he's getting on base in half of his at bats, which is just insane to think about. So I don't know if I can really put it into context just how important he is for this team that has really needed every run it could get. But I mean, he's been super consistent and steady, which is all you can ask, because we mentioned it earlier, but the 2022 team was kind of boom and bust. Last year was very consistent. And then you bring a guy like Andrew Fischer, who's kind of the model for a consistent hitter in the SEC. And I think he's kind of summed that up this year.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't really flinched. Like, he had to move to first because of the injury stuff before the year. And you're like, uh-oh, like, that's not a great start. And you're like, how's this going to go? And a great teammate talking about Azuna and how much he's helped him, talking about Curly, and he's become a leader. But it's just kind of one of those where, because the season has just been so crazy and the offense has been so they've struggled with power for the majority of SEC play, that Andrew Fischer has consistency of just getting on base, you take for granted. Like, he's the ultimate taken for granted guy this year, that years from now fans will look and they're like, yeah, Andrew Fisher's probably pretty good. Like, no, Andrew Fischer was really good for Tennessee. Like, he was like special good for the year, where, like you said, like 500 OBP, he was almost impossible to get out. He was not just a home run, because I think before the year we thought he was just like a home run strikeout guy, where it was just going to be kind of boom or bust in the middle of the lineup potentially. But it's like, no, this dude's just like nearly impossible to get out. Like, Andrew Fischer has fantastic plate discipline. He's able to spray the ball all over the field, and he can hit home runs, but it doesn't, like, even as a high home run total, it doesn't feel, Ryan, like he hits a bunch of dingers. Like, it doesn't, I don't know if you feel the same, but this year doesn't feel like he's been mashing to the same way, like even like Billy Amick last year. And it just doesn't feel like that because he's been so good in so many other ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to Caleb's point. I don't know the stat exactly off of my head, but I think he has like 21, 22 home runs and maybe 10 of them in SEC play. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
But like in most ways, when I would say something like that in that context, it would be like a little bit of a slight at the player, of like, because in SEC, what you do in SEC play, that's what matters. SEC play in the postseason. I don't care what you do against Hofstra in February. But he's been so consistent. He's gotten on base at such a high clip. And look, I think you guys both kind of combined to make this point. But for an offense and a team that hasn't been very consistent, Andrew Fisher's been incredibly consistent, and I think that's really valuable. And I think that value would be more noticeable if maybe Tennessee had been a little bit better around him, I guess, and a little bit more consistent offensively, and had more power hitters in the middle of the lineup like they've had in 22 and in 24. So, and then you made a good point. I mean, he played third base last year at Ole Miss. He spent basically his whole offseason working at third base, and he's been, certainly a serviceable first baseman, solid defensive first baseman. I think all the things that I had questions about him coming into the season, he's been exceptional at, or he's like really answered his questions in a really positive way. And then what you knew he had with some of the power hitting, it's still been there.
Yeah. It's one of the great years, and we'll see how it goes for him. He can continue on with his legacy and his how much he'll be thought about years from now.
I need him to get to 25. That's what I had in my preseason predictions. 25.
I think he can get 25.
Lots of non-conference game left.
Well,
at least
I was gonna
3.
say, I say he could get that.
On Friday. It could be 5.
I mean, he would have to get to Omaha, I think, to get 25.
Good coach. Is he at 21 or 22?
He's at 22, and half have been in SEC.
He can get it. He can get it before the college.
If you want to get really nerdy about his stats, he's got a weighted on base average of 520, and his batting average on balls put in play is 317. So his stats, he's going to make money next year.
Yeah,
I don't get why he's so low projected in these mock drafts and stuff. He's I think Keith Law had him 54. I get defensively would be the knock. He doesn't have a true
defense is a knock, and he's old. He's over 21. So you always run into the issue of why should we draft you over the 16-year-old from overseas? But I mean, he's proven it at the highest level, and he can hit for power. He can hit for consistency. Yeah. There's no
Did the
knock on
Angels
his
pick
game.
around then? Because he's going to be an Angel. The Angels love the older college player. Nobody loves the older college player like the Angels.
Yeah.
Hey, and the Angels love the UT guys. So
yeah.
Angel, I mean, Colorado or Rocky.
Yeah. Who, by the way, Jordan Beck, shout out to noted leadoff man, Jordan Beck, who we all thought was a natural leadoff at the next level. Raking for the Rockies. They've destroyed Doe, which I just get Doe out of Colorado, please. Get an absolute albatross of a situation. Free Doe from that Rocky Mountain air. Get him somewhere better. Free Doe. I got to get him out.
Too? Can we get Halverson out in the escape mission?
Halverson's actually weird. I think he's actually okay in Colorado. He's been immune. Maybe it's the Mizzou thing. Already Midwestern guy. More built for it.
Columbia, Missouri, and Denver, Colorado are basically 200 miles away, is what I've often said. Quick and easy drive from those two places.
Many are saying, I mean, it's very different than South Georgia. I think Doe's a South Georgia guy. Actually, I think I want to say Evans. Remember correctly?
That sounds right. I think that's right.
Yeah, so a little bit different.
Over Georgia State.
Georgia Southern. Very different. That's a bad slip up, Caleb. That's a bad one. There's a Southern not state hashtag, Southern and state. That's a rivalry right there.
I've made that mistake before. State plays in the Brave Stadium. I had a kid from Knoxville play there. And then Southern is Chase Dolander.
Yes. There you go.
Take me out back. Send me off with the pitchers from Colorado.
You're saying that, Caleb. Ryan gave me a heart attack doing the Cam Ward gesture last week on the pod. Out of nowhere, he's doing it way more laid back this time, but it was unprompted, just out of nowhere. I almost had a full on stroke on this podcast because it freaked me out. Out of nowhere, I thought.
Watch this guy stripe a drive and leave the tee box doing it.
Uncle Colin, who I've long said is the very, very best sports media has to offer as the Titans making the playoffs.
Oof.
Must be expanding the playoffs.
We'll see. Ryan, most unfairly hated Vol player during the Heupel era thus far. I was thinking about this the other day. Just now you've got 4 years of data here of just the one that you've seen fans just do not did not like the most during that time that you don't get, and you still think it just didn't add up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with all of that is I can see the logic to most of it, Like, I think I go a couple of different directions here. One would be Kamal Hadden, because I think he was always a pretty solid player.
Yeah.
Like, and Adams had a great 23 before he got hurt. But the dude was running his mouth the entire South Carolina sideline constantly as he gave up like 12 catches for 200 yards, and Tennessee's season came crumbling down. So, and then he gave, I can't remember if it was ETN or Johnson a little forearm shiver to push him 75 yards for a touchdown instead of showing any effort to make a tackle in the swamp. So, like, I see the logic of why people don't get.
And then he tried to fight in the swamp. Don't forget
and
that.
then he tried to fight.
He did try to fight.
Tennessee kind of embarrassed themselves and absolutely not showing up.
That was an awful game.
Yes, it was.
Awful experience all around. That game, you knew when Milton was getting sacked and threw it up in the air like 100 yards up, and it was, you're like, this game, it's over.
Good punt.
Yeah, like we're this is not going well.
Yeah. So, and look, like I don't think really that many people actually hate Squirrel White. I do think revisionist history, Squirrel White was better in 23 than he's going to get credit for, like, long term. I think people will just think of his 24 season and not the fact that he had like 875 yards, 900 receiving yards on a passing offense that wasn't very good. I think it's fair to say Joe Milton in a lot of ways. Like, I don't think Joe Milton was a great player. He didn't get a ton of hate, but I think Joe Milton got pinned with all of Tennessee's offensive issues are your fault.
He was kind of vindicated in a lot of ways this past year.
That's my point exactly. Like, it clearly was not all Joe Milton. So again, like, I think I see the logic to most of them. This isn't a Tennessee player, and I see the logic again. Shout out Ryan Sylvia. He had the assist on this one. Tim Banks. Like, I think Tim Banks does a great job. And you better believe the first time Tennessee loses a game with their bad offense next year, giving up 24 points, Tim Banks will be getting just excruciated on X.com. So I don't know. Like, most of the guys, I can kind of see.
Are there still fans who have not fully excited that Tim Banks is one of the 10, maybe 12 best defensive coordinators in the sport?
I think if this is actually a good question. We need somebody with a really big Twitter following to put this out. A poll is
this could be on the show next week. We could have callers like here. Like, where do you rank Tim Banks? Like, where to get a feel for this?
I think if you put up an X poll, is Tim Banks a top 10 defense coordinator in the country? I think you would have less than 40% of Tennessee fans say yes.
That's weird. I wonder, at the very least, maybe the middle ground, because I think Tim Banks is one of the 10 best defensive coordinators in the sport. But I also think it's indisputable that Tennessee has a top 10 defensive staff. Like, the combination of Garner, Chop, William Inge, even Willie with the corners. I mean, the cornerback play was elite last year, and people were worried about that. And then Banks with safeties. Like, it's an elite staff. Like, that side of the ball is elite.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's been really good, and I think at least undoubtedly, I'd also be curious to see like what the percentage. Because while I say it's low top 10, I think if you made it top 25, you would probably get the vast majority of people would agree with that. It would be.
I mean, if you're not in 25, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, if you're not in the top 20, like, that's just not like that's not real life. Like, we can have a conversation between top 10 and top 15. We're not having a conversation of top 25.
I think you would have a vocal contingent that would be saying he's not top 25. Like, it wouldn't be large.
I'd be willing to bet fans of other teams would be higher on Tim Banks than Tennessee.
Yeah,
probably.
Because like, you can see, you go up at Tennessee, you go up against that. Like, last year, like, Tennessee's offense was sputtering the whole season, and they made the playoff because you had, Dylan Sampson and a good defense. I think Joe Milton was the first guy that came to mind, just because it wasn't his fault. And then also Tennessee's entire offensive line the past 2 seasons, for guys not named Cooper Mays, they've been pretty hard on those guys. And I think they do, a lot of them deserve it, I guess. But just those are easily the most hated. That's the most hated group. But then you look at like last year, like, if Nico Imaliava doesn't hold the ball 5 to 6 seconds every time he's in the pocket, does the offense look a little better? Because what's good about Heupel's offense is it masks bad offensive line play, because the whole goal is like, at its peak with Hendon Hooker, you're in the pocket 1, 2, maybe 3 seconds and the ball is out. Like, offensive linemen don't even have time to make contact with the defensive linemen if they're doing it right. Last year, that wasn't the case. So I think, the offensive line play hasn't been good. It's definitely been hated. I don't think all of those guys deserve that hate, but there's definitely been a couple that kind of bring the whole unit down. So Joe Milton was definitely my first thought for guys who were hated by the fan base. And then after last year realized, how good Hendon Hooker was and how much room to grow there was for the offense. But so I would say the offensive line could be up there too.
I would throw Jeremy Banks into this because I think there was like a complete misunderstanding on Jeremy Banks, the football player, versus like people's frustration with him not being available against South Carolina that we'll never fully understand or know. But Jeremy Banks was a really good linebacker at Tennessee. Like Jeremy Banks, Tennessee's defense was better with Jeremy Banks. Tennessee's defense and their linebacking core could have really used Jeremy Banks the last 3 years. And I think Jeremy Banks is one of those guys where I think Tennessee fans will look back of like, I don't think they'll be like, yeah, Jeremy Banks was an awesome Tennessee linebacker, but I would say Jeremy Banks was an awesome Tennessee linebacker. And when he was available, he was an important piece to that defense with not a lot of talent around him, especially early on in the Heupel era. And he was able to be that kind of leader when he was on the field and help Tennessee in a big way. I think Jeremy Banks is one that's just kind of like, man, you got to separate, like, whatever you feel about the other stuff. It's like Jeremy Banks, the football player, was really good.
Good for sure. Really good. Feels a bit of a stretch.
I want to go back to his PFF rings. Like Jeremy Banks, I mean,
what I will say for Jeremy Banks was, you look this up.
Yeah,
that Tennessee just hasn't had the skill set of a linebacker since he was really good at rushing the passer. They haven't had anybody with that skill set since. And I think speaking of PFF grades, the PFF grades of Tennessee's linebackers and pass rush last year,
yeah,
they were rough. They didn't have anybody that could really do that. And another name I'll throw out is Jalen McCullough. He was terrible. He was terrible in 22. There's no getting around that on a bad defense. But he had a really, really nice 23 season. That again, I think probably will kind of go skated over.
So he had 100 plus tackles. He was the first Vols player to have 100 plus tackles since 2015 when he did it. Like he's a little bit of a machine.
Jalen Reeves-Maben, 2015.
Ooh, it's a good call.
I would think. Because AJ Johnson, I think, was already gone. I think 2014 was his last year.
I don't have it in front of me, but that would make sense. Caleb, final thing here, and we'll wrap up. The most intriguing player on the defensive line for UT next season is who for you?
It's got to be Joshua Josephs because, you have James Pierce leaving. So I feel like that's kind of the gimme answer, cop out. So I definitely think he's waited his turn, which I think Tennessee fans really appreciate that, especially after, the whole turnover and half the team leaving when Heupel got here. Joshua Josephs is the guy who's waited his turn, 9 tackles for loss last year. With James Pierce gone, there's going to be a hole to fill for pass rushing. And even last year when James Pierce wasn't playing his best, teams were still scheming, to slide offensive linemen to help out. So I think Joshua Josephs is my cop-out answer. Just he'll be the guy you see kind of have an impact. And then maybe a Jackson Moy, a former Pac-12 guy, rest in peace to the Pac-12. He's back this year, interior lineman. Once again, you lose Amari Thomas. That interior line needs a guy to step up. I think he can be that guy. And I think I'll be curious to see what he does. So those would be my two outside of any freshmen. But in years past, we haven't really seen freshmen play that much for Rodney Garner because there's so many guys in the room. And with the rotations, I think everybody will get their reps. But I'll go Joshua Joseph's my cop-out answer. And then Jackson Moy on the interior. I'm curious to see what he can do. And there's still guys, floating around who we haven't seen, like a Jamal Wallace, who was taking heads off in JUCO. He's still on the roster. So we'll see if maybe one of those guys could step up and be a wild card.
I think, Ryan, Joseph's is it's an obvious answer, but it's also an incredibly important one because you're losing real production with Pierce and Omar Norman-Lott, both on the interior and on the edge, both guys who are playing important third down snaps for you. Like Joshua Josephs has to have a big year for Tennessee's defensive line to keep up what they've been able to do the last 2 years. It can't all fall on Joshua Josephs, but in year 4, it's time for him to have that kind of breakout high sack number type of year. And we haven't seen that at this point. He has talent, but there's a lot on Joshua Joseph's plate for this defense this year. I think Tyree West to me is right in that mold, Ryan, because I think Dominic Bailey, it doesn't matter all that much because Tennessee, Rodney Garner specifically, rotates so much across the defensive line. It really doesn't matter who starts, but it does. Tyree West kind of came on a little bit last year and he showed flashes. He has the highest upside, I think, in 25 at strong side defenseman. Weathersby, I think, is kind of a ultimate wild card. He was impressing. I think I remember it was a year and a half ago now before his injury. And last year was a lost year for him, but he's a super talented guy as well. But I think it's Tyree West to me. Like if Tyree pops on the opposite side of Joshua Joseph, that goes a long way for Tennessee because Caleb, you brought up that like these long-term guys who've been in Gardner's system for a while. Like that's one of the other things about fans. Like everyone's just kind of burnt out. Like, oh, what's the point of keeping up recruiting anymore? High school recruiting. It's just everybody leaves. Like, look at Tennessee's roster right now. Like that's not true. Like a lot of it, like it's still incredibly important. And Tennessee's still building through the high school ranks. Like high school recruiting is still paramount to this team's success and where they ultimately go. But Tyree West and Joshua Joseph are great examples of that. They've both been in this program for 4 years. And I think West is someone that is kind of overlooked on the opposite side to me that I'm like, I think they really kind of sneaky need West to have a breakout and surpass Dominic Bailey in that starting group.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. West was going to be one of the guys I mentioned. I almost weirdly think there isn't as much pressure on Josh Josephs for the team. So I think it just needs to be one of the guys in that spot. It could be Caleb Herring. It could be Jordan Ross. Like someone has to emerge. And I think at the very base, you have a really high floor. Like we saw last year, even though the sack numbers weren't there, Josh Josephs was a good player.
Yeah.
So if somebody else takes that step as a more lead pass rush guy, like it wouldn't be the end of the world. I think you still would point to Josh Joseph. This is the guy you would hope it would be because he's the senior. He's the guy who has been an effective player. But yeah, I like Tyree West. I like Davian Hobbs too. I mean, he's a really talented guy who has at times flashed. But I would almost, I don't know. I was going to have a take. I don't know how convicted I am to it. But I would say Davian Hobbs and Jackson Moy are low-key two of the more important players for Tennessee's season because they were the third defense tackles last year, third string defense tackles last year. And I'm not saying it was all their fault, but when Tennessee did go 3 deep, that was the group that kind of did get run on. Like there were a lot of games. The only time Tennessee gave up rushing yards was when the third team defensive line was in. Both still young players, but like those are going to be two of the top 3 defense tackles in a room that's sneaky, I think, a little bit thin. So I think that both those guys are super important, and I may be a little bit higher on Hobbs' ceiling than I am Moy.
And you also have to appreciate with David Hobbs, both maybe a knock and a plus, is he came in as a linebacker and got moved to the interior defensive line. So he's still kind of learning as they go with that group. And I think, like you mentioned, those guys are going to be big because if Tennessee's offense isn't going to be up to par, you can't let teams run the ball on you and control the clock like they already want to do, because we've seen what happens when Tennessee goes 3 and out in 20 seconds and a team can hold the ball and go, 7 minutes down the field. I think Jordan Ross was a good shout. I should have mentioned him, Schumpert. That was a good one. He was the number one, speaking of high school recruiting, he was the number one edge rusher a couple years ago, and he's going to be a sophomore now. But he's a guy when you walk into the practice facility or see him get off the bus, he jumps off the page at 6'5". His wingspan is insane. So that's a guy who's got length coming off the edge that I think could be big for this group and be kind of a youthful spark. Because I think, kind of to Shumpert's point too, last year you were subbing out seniors for other seniors. This year, when you get past that first group, you're going to be starting to dip into some of those sophomores and those juniors that you've been recruiting and kind of sat a lot last year that now, what are they made of? And it'll be their first test.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Ryan Schumpert, what can the good folks check out from you and the team over at RockyTopInsider.com this week?
Yeah, tons of Tennessee baseball stuff. I had a fun article today, power ranking my trust tree of Tennessee's bullpen pitchers heading in the NCAA tournament. Did some deep diving on some of the recent trends with those guys and numbers like that. So proud of that piece, and then going to have a piece on A.J. Russell and a little bit of his recovery back from the injury last year that was, very peculiar with some of the timing and stuff like that. So those are 2 things amongst many other Tennessee baseball content we'll have over at RTI this week.
I love it. Caleb Jarreau, what about you and the team over at the Daily Times this week?
Yeah, we just got back from Murfreesboro last week. So if you missed any high school coverage from Blount County, you don't have to scroll too far on our site. But obviously, lots of baseball preview stuff. And then here in the next couple of weeks, we'll be rolling out our all Blount County prep teams as well. So that'll be fun. Some fun features that go along with that. But just in the midst of baseball postseason and probably some softball mixed in too. So lots of stuff to keep us busy at least.
I love it. Caleb, Ryan, keep up the great work, my friends, and I'll talk to y'all again next week.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.